Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us today for the 6th British Association for Romantic Studies digital event. And this is part of a new initiative for this academic year. I'm Dr. Anna Mercer. I'm a lecturer in English literature at Cardiff University, and I am the communications officer for BARS. Since autumn of 2020, I have been working with a group of excellent colleagues and friends from the BARS Executive Committee, as well as our superb digital events fellow, Francesca, to bring you some curated online conversations about scholarship in Romanticism today. I'm sure one of the team now will helpfully post in the chat the link to the BARS blog, where all the previous recordings of our events so far can be found, as well as the forthcoming schedule up to the summer of this year. Today, the topic under discussion by our expert speakers is Romanticism and the Museum, a subject close to my own heart, and I'll come to that in a moment. The full title of the event was originally Romanticism and the Museum, Whom Do We Serve? And I hope that you'll appreciate the ways in which the speakers today will focus on the writers, the audiences, the communities, and the scholars that literary museums preserve history for, and how they hope to provide spaces to celebrate the remarkable and the truly loved figures from the past. This event proposes to discuss the challenges facing museums and heritage institutions and organisations in 2021. We will today explore the role of museums based in the UK that are dedicated to celebrating the works and lives of figures from the Romantic period. These sites are far more than single buildings. They provide a dedicated space for conversation and inspiration. Literary house museums lead the way in championing the importance of preserving the legacy of literary icons, both in their work with collections, but also in their work with the communities that they serve. We want to think about who such museums are for and how they can engage new groups beyond their core following, something particularly important with regards to issues like access, relevancy, and diversity, of course, coupled with the impact too of COVID-19. 2020 was and 2021 will be a difficult year for everyone, including museums. As many of them lie empty, curators and staff are considering the future of iconic buildings dependent on their connection to a specific location. In a recent article for The Guardian on museum closures, a curator from the Dickens Museum in London was cited explaining as how a museum based on personality, a family home, quote, "The thing that brings this place to life is having people in it." And beyond the troubles of the pandemic, museums have been prior to that always working on how to share that personality through new initiatives, including media, online work, and doing generally new and exciting things to prove that heritage institutions are not just elite. They are not closed and old-fashioned. These are places that are looking to become more inclusive, accessible, and dynamic in the modern age. And today, I'm sure we'll hear about some great examples of that. After I completed my PhD, I actually spent a year working and training at Keats House in Hampstead, and I learned so much about the role of the museum there and the role that that museum plays in the local community. I learned about the huge workload and dedication required by staff to preserve such an important spot, as well as just how significant the emotive power of a place like Keats House can have for visitors from all over the world. My training there, under the support of the curator Rob Shakespeare, who is here today, and other staff in the museum, some of which I think may be listening, has given me so much to think about with regards to developing further links on the importance of the link between academia and museums, something that I really care about, and I'd love to hear other people's thoughts in our Q&A discussion today as well. One of the results of my aim of linking academia and museums and scholarly associations and museums is this event. That's the result of my thinking on that. So hopefully it should be a productive discussion. But to the rest of our panel, I've mentioned Keats House, and I'm also delighted to welcome representatives from Wordsworth Grasmere, Jeff Cowton, and European Romanticisms in Association, Nicola Watson. I've experienced hugely important moments of conviviality and even breathtaking emotion when, for example, viewing rare manuscripts at the Jerwood Centre in Grasmere under Jeff's supervision, or standing outside Dante's tomb in Ravenna before listening to a multitude of inspiring papers on romantic objects as organised at a conference by Nicola. I'm also delighted to welcome two early career researchers to this panel, Charlotte May and Amy Wilcockson. They join us in representing new ways of connecting academia to museums and so much more than that they're going to tell us about. I want to thank everyone on the panel for all the amazing work they do, and I will stop talking in a moment and hand over to them because it's them who you are here to listen to. I will introduce our speakers one by one. They will all give their response to the key question: why do literary house museums matter in 2021? There will then be time for a Q&A at the end, so do get your questions ready and post those in the chat. The speakers are presenting today in alphabetical order by surname, and we begin with Jeff Cowton. So Jeff, if you are there, I'm just going to introduce you, but get ready to unmute and say hello. Jeff Cowton is Curator and Head of Learning at Wordsworth Grasmere. Jeff has worked in the museum's world for 40 years, I think that's right. He's nodding. Having begun his career as a volunteer with the Wordsworth Trust in 1981, before becoming curator in 1994. In 2010, Jeff was awarded an MBE in recognition of services to museums. He is currently leading on the reinterpretation of the site and the museum for the HLF-funded project, Reimagining Wordsworth. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Anna. That was a tremendous introduction. You've set the scene perfectly. I hope we can live up to it. Let's see. So I'm just going to see if I can share this screen. Where are we? Let's have a look.
That looks good. We just need it in.
Are we okay so far? Great stuff. Thank you. Well, thank you.
Needs to be in presentation mode, I think, Jeff.
It is on my screen. Is it not on your?
No.
It's filling my whole screen. This is Anna. Are you there?
Yes.
I'm going to suggest that you move to the next person because I'm holding things up. It's already taken 5 to 10 minutes.
That's fine. We'll drop you an email in a moment, and then we will maybe be able to share your slides for you. Okay, we'll come back to you.
Okay.
All right.
I'm really sorry, everybody. I'm really sorry.
It's okay, Jeff. Please don't worry. Oh my God, these things always happen.
Yeah.
Let's just go to Charlotte May, and we will come back to you, Jeff. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for bearing with it.
No. Thank you very much. Okay, so Charlotte May is from the University of Nottingham. Charlotte, I hope you are there.
Yes, I'm here, Anna.
Great. Yes, we can see your screen now, I think. I hope everyone can see Charlotte's screen. Charlotte is a trustee of Keswick Museum and has recently finished a postdoctoral project on Robert Southey's Keswick, creating educational resources for the public and schools about Robert Southey and his life and times in the northeastern Lake District town of Keswick. Beautiful place. She is currently working on the letters of the banker poet Samuel Rogers, and who is a contemporary of Robert Southey. So welcome, Charlotte, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Anna. It's really nice to be here just with Jeff as well, because Jeff is 15 miles away from Keswick. So Wordsworth and Southey have a fantastic relationship. They have a really, well, they walked to each other's houses all the time. So actually, there were many mishaps on the journeys between as well. So Jeff, you're in good company here. I am a little bit of an outlier in some ways, I suppose, because actually what I'm talking to you about today is not a literary house museum as we might perceive it. What I really want to say is, so why do literary house museums matter in 2021? And I think that's because 2020 showed us that a literary house museum is not just bricks and mortar. It's actually so much more than that. It's that domestic setting which is evoked by our participation in a certain space, by our acknowledgement of the collections in front of us, by that connection and engagement we have with each other in the space as well as the collections. So that's my thesis for belonging here, because I realise we're not quite a house. But we are in Keswick, we're the northeast of the Lake District, and the Keswick Museum is actually a very short walk away from Greeter Hall, where Southey lived with his family from 1803 to 1843. These 40 years are the last 40 years of Southey's life. They are the most productive. They are the years in which he became poet laureate and fulfilled, or not so much, those duties. They're his controversial years, as well as his radical youth. He has a I would argue, a more radical middle age. So Keswick is a really important location, and even though Greta Hall is private, we still have good relationship with it as a private house, and it's somewhere where we're very keen for people to see, even if you can't quite walk up to the door. So this is a fantastic image that was actually created last year by one of our volunteers at the museum. We provided him with images from Sarah Coleridge's journal, because Robert Southey moved into Greta Hall with the Coleridge family in 1803, and that included his sister-in-law and their children too. It's quite a busy household. It's an expanded family. There's a lot going on here. So this image, tailor drawn for us, is phenomenal, and it shows you what domestic life might have looked like at Greta Hall. So we have the nursery and children's bedroom, we have Southey's study, we have Aunt Lovell's room, the other sister, Edith Southey's other sister, as well as Sarah Coleridge. And you can also see, I love the imagining of the figures actually participating in domestic life in this space. Now, this is an educational resource that we are sharing with schools and with the members of the public as well who come to the museum. So arguably, by coming to the museum, you are going to be able to see more of Southey's Greta Hall than by being in Greta Hall itself. This is just one of my favourite images. It's by William Westall, the younger brother of the portrait artist Richard Westall. And this is from the front of Greta Hall, looking out onto Keswick. And you can see the church in which Southey is buried in the middle, and you can see the mountains in the background as well. And it's pretty accurate. So today, if you do go onto the private property, obviously legally, please no trespassing, you will be able to see that there is a little tree house just on the left of this image, but that it's pretty much the same. And that again is this amazing relationship that we as a museum can provide. You may not be able to go onto the private grounds, but through Keswick Museum you'll be able to see this landscape. So I can take you inside Greta Hall. So again, I haven't broken in yet, but I want to show you what it's like in there, and I want to give you a privileged view that not many people can have, and this is because of the collections we have of Greta Hall. This is an 1838 watercolour by Hannah Fellaby, and actually it shows us not just what the study may have looked like, but it shows us one of the most important spaces, I would argue, in the house. Now, Southey's a very busy man. There are a few, I would argue that there are a few people who probably are known for writing as much. I mean, quantity versus quality was a critical argument during Southey's life and is still used against him sometimes. But in this room is where Southey did a lot of his writing. He'd often write what he wanted to write before breakfast. So you might be thinking of his epics. He loved a good epic. Then during the daytime, he would write the work that he's paid for. After all, even though he's only a tenant of Greta Hall, because actually the Southey family didn't own it, he's got to earn his own keep, that of his family, and that also of his many cats. I will come on to the cats, who are always an important thing with Southey. I should also mention that we have a mummified cat at Keswick Museum. It's not Southey related, but it feels quite at home with our Southey collection. And in the museum, not only do we have the watercolour, but we have these items. So this is Southey's letterbox. This is where he actually kept correspondence, and you can see that on the white table in the image in front of the window. We have Southey's inkwell, which is actually engraved with Greta Hall. We have his chair. Our volunteers have been providing fabulous insights into these collections because they spend so much time with them, and actually some volunteers have noticed there's quite heavy leaning on the left of this chair. So that's it's a very interesting subject. I don't believe there is any evidence for Southey as being left-handed, but again, it's something that we're very kind of keen to pick up on, these little details that evoke the process of creativity. And finally, the Memoirs of the Cats of Greta Hall. So this was written by Southey to entertain his daughter Edith May, and it's a memoir of some of their cats, such as Rumpelstiltskin and Hurly-Burly-Bus. There are cats everywhere in Southey's letters. There are more books than cats in Greta Hall, however. So I'd like to move on to another watercolour of the inside of Greta Hall by Hannah Fellaby, and this is the Ketonian Library. It's a pun. Daniel Cook asked for some good some good museum jokes, and there's lots of jokes in Southey which sometimes go over my head, but the Ketonian Library, it's a pun on the antiquarian collector Henry Cotton, and it's called so because the books are bound in cotton. So although this is very much, in fact, we sometimes see studies and libraries as masculine spaces, but it's impossible for them to be considered as such when we know that some of Southey's books were upcycled by the women of the household in these beautiful bright fabrics. So what would happen is you would take material, we've got some of the printed muslin that the women would then, sorry, it's printed cotton, apologies, would then turn into covers to protect Southey's very precious books. Sometimes the content is at odds with the cover. So one of these books, for example, is a very dry religious discourse. The cover, however, is wonderfully whimsical. And here's a portrait of the children as well, of 3 of the younger Southey children. So it's really important that we see this space as not just one man alone in his study. This is an active space. There are many examples in Southey's letters, of which we at the museum have about 600, of the children coming in and out, and Southey needing to break up his day to make sure that he could take care of his duty as a father. We also know that Southey wrote a lot to entertain children, such as the story of the 3 bears. So although we may see this as Southey's study in the Ketonian Library, it's a much more sociable space than that. And finally, I want to finish on the item that I adore the most, and I had an emotional connection to this, and I'm not afraid to say I nearly cried, and this is the Greek grammar in rhyme that Robert Southey wrote for his son Herbert, who died when he was 9½. He saw Herbert as a man of great promise, or as a boy of great promise, and thought he would be a great intellectual. However, unfortunately, he died young, and this book shows that wonderful intention that Southey had about educating him. And this wonderful item in our collection tells us much about family relationships. So it's a really lovely item that captured my attention. So to finish with, I hope I've made my case. A literary house museum, what is it? We've had to go online in the last year. We've turned a lot into social media. I did a lot of photography with my colleague Fiona. We went to the museum and we photographed as much as possible. This is going to be the focus when we have situations where people cannot access collections in person. In fact, they protect collections, as we well know. So 2020 also showed us that literary house museums are not just buildings, but they're communities. And our community at Keswick, from the friends of the museum to our staff and volunteers, many of whom are still furloughed in terms of staff, have really made it possible for us to continue to share the Southey collection that we love so much. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for such a fascinating talk. And I think really bringing into the discussion there the crucial aspect of the house not just representing the author, but the family and those around them, and how much of that is something that really bolsters and supports their writing. So we need to know about that too. And I can also enjoying seeing people in the chat talking about the study envy they have when you showed that beautiful image of the study, as well as envy over those beautiful books and the book covers too. Wow, what wonderful, wonderful objects. Thank you, Charlotte. We come next to Rob Shakespeare. So Rob, get ready to speak in a moment. I'll just introduce you. Rob Shakespeare is Principal Curator at Keats House Museum in Hampstead, and he has led the Keats 200 project, marking the bicentenary of John Keats's time at Keats House, which was originally called Wentworth Place, with a series of exhibitions, events, and digital initiatives. I'm sure pretty much everyone here will know that that bicentenary period ended very recently, as with the 200th anniversary of Keats's death was on the 23rd of February. Previously, Rob worked as a history teacher before moving into the museum sector as an education officer in Enfield, and then as an education manager, followed by museum and archives manager at the Museum of Croydon, and then he came to Keats House. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you very much, Anna, and hello everyone. Welcome, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me onto the panel. Can I just check, Anna, that the presentation that I'm showing is moving on screen for you?
That looks great, yes.
Thanks very much. So, as Anna said, I arrived at Keats House, and I've just realised, I think that was exactly 3 years ago tomorrow. And like any good person joining a new organisation, I'd done my homework for my interview and for preparing to join the team at Keats House. And I'd been on my pre-visit prior to interview. And I'd found that Keats House was run by the City of London, but it was an independent charity. That's an interesting setup. And it was a beautiful Regency house in Hampstead. Actually, I'd walked past quite a few times, looked over the fence and thought, that looks beautiful and interesting. I must go in there one day, and never had. And the reason probably I never had was I don't actually know much about Keats, or maybe I hope I should say I didn't. But like I said, I applied, I did my homework, and I joined I visited the house and I saw this straplined the beautiful Regency villa where romantic poet John Keats found inspiration, friendship and love. So I went inside and found this absolutely stunning parlour, which I learned actually he only rented, but it was his parlour and it was where he wrote most of his work. Oh, and look, it's based the interpretation on that beautiful painting on the wall. A painting that actually some of you may have seen hanging in the National Portrait Gallery, the original by Joseph Seven, and at the house in the parlour hangs this copy by Edmund Dyer, and that led to the reinterpretation of Keats's parlour in Keats House, Hampstead. It's a very special room in the story of the house. It's the room where he sat and looked out into the garden across to the heath that inspired him so much. So you begin to learn, you can even sit in the parlour, you can sit in the chairs just like Keats does in the painting, and you're invited to. And you can sit there and look out of the same window and contemplate what Keats might have seen and what inspired him. And it's a really beautiful, moving part of the house. And then you start to find out more about the story of the house and the other people that live there. And you find out that there's other families actually that owned it first, and then some moved out and some moved in, including Fanny Braun, who Keats then fell in love with and exchanged an engagement ring and spent some of the happiest times of his life with at Keats House, then called Wentworth Place. And then you get to know as you join the team, you've got a fantastic team working there, caring for the collections, running the house, opening it to the public, working with school groups. You've got volunteers. You've got groups that work for the museum running events like the Keats House Poets. You've got a marvellous events programme that goes on in the garden and the house. And so you think, wow, this is pretty amazing. What do I do here? And you start with your blank canvas and you start to research and you find out more from the collections and from the people that are there and know more than you. And you find out that, oh, actually, okay, he was born somewhere else. Yeah, I've got that. I know that. And then he was christened. Oh, okay. And then there's another place where he did an apprenticeship. Okay, he was a medical student. Interesting. And he carried on at Guy's Hospital. That's really interesting. Oh, I've seen the statue. I've put in two and two together. Ah, there's another house in Rome where he lived. Or did he live there? Did he just go there and die? Well, he's certainly buried there. We know that. Oh, God, hang on. There's lots of other places now claiming a Keats connection. There's Margate, there's Teignmouth, there's the Isle of Wight, there's Oxford, there's Winchester. And it all becomes a bit confusing for a while and overwhelming until it all starts to filter through and the poet emerges. The detail of the person that you need to find out about and you want to communicate to your audiences. And you find out what a remarkable life, short but remarkable life he led, and that he wrote some of the most beautiful poems in the English language. And you find out that they weren't well rated during his lifetime, but they're well rated now and thought some of the best poems ever written, and are associated with the Romantic movement. So again, you start with a blank page and you think, okay, so I've got this Keats House and I've actually got some organisational targets that I need to meet, and those are things like preserving the house and the collections, and also caring for the garden and the heritage of the whole site. And we want people to discover, learn and develop and feel welcomed and included. And you use all those as the foundation for a new programme, Keats 200, because why I've been appointed and what the house is leading towards and the team there are working towards is actually the bicentenary of his death in February 1821. But that death occurred somewhere else. So what story are we telling at the house? And at that point, we decided to focus not on Keats's death for Keats 200, but we decided to focus on Keats's life. Keats's life specifically at Wentworth Place, the place that we run and we open to the public and engage the public with. So we began our programme there in December 2018, and we developed a partnership approach that would take us through the whole bicentenary, through to February 2021, just gone, and crucially beyond. Because we think that the bicentenary of Keats's most productive years as a poet are a real opportunity, not only for people who already know about Keats to find out more about Keats and get involved, but actually for new audiences to discover Keats and enjoy his works and engage with poetry and find out what poetry is all about to us today. So we developed a new programme, some of it built on existing things, a big programme to conserve and refurbish the exterior of the house, which had been well maintained, but not for a while and needed significant investment, which was put in by the City of London Corporation and completed just before March 2020. We also took a really careful look at our collections, and specifically the collections in our care that we felt needed more exposure and help tell the story of Keats's life. And we started to interpret those and display them at the house and bring in loans when appropriate, but really focus on our collections, use it as an opportunity to tell new stories about those items on display. And we put together a new event programme, this one using live interpreters provided by Andrew Ashmore and Associates, but real experts in researching and bringing historical stories and histories to new audiences. You can see here the launch event of Keats 200, where the character dressed as Keats on the left took an audience down from where he was lodging in Hampstead to Wentworth Place on the day that he actually moved into the house, on the 200th anniversary of that day. And another event on the Heath where a famous meeting between Keats and Coleridge, designed to engage a wider audience, people that didn't visit the house but might have heard of it because they used the Heath. We also work with partners such as the Poetry Society, working here with our poetry ambassadors, volunteers who did poetry readings at the house and still do. And here they are rehearsing for one of the key events in our annual programme, but also particularly for January 2019 on the 200th anniversary of Keats writing The Eve of St. Agnes. And we started looking for new partners and engaging them in the work we were trying to do, specifically young people. And young people that might not have heard of Keats, but might have a connection. So we approached Chicken Shed Theatre in Enfield, a place where Keats went to school himself and trained in his medical training. And so we wanted to work with Chicken Shed Theatre, and they developed a series of workshops working with 20 odd young people over an 18-week period to develop a performance piece about Keats. We approached partners like Culture and Create Jobs, who were working to diversify the museum sector and create new entrance routes, to train 2 young trainees, get them a qualification and on-the-job experience working in a heritage setting. And we're very proud that we've delivered 2 of those traineeships during Keats 200. We've had a long history of some very high-profile poets in residence at the house, but we were also approached and wanted to work with an artist in residence for Keats 200. And we were fortunate to encounter Elaine Dwiggenon, who I think is on the call, I hope. And she's been working throughout lockdown, inspired by the garden and the heath, to explore stories connected with the themes in Keats's work and the history and stories of the house and the flowers in the garden, the plants in the garden. And so, of course, like all of us, we came to the crashing point where all this was going on, ramping up, increasing, we hoped, in momentum and interest, leading towards the culmination when we all had to close. And first of all, we did simple things online, as many of us have been forced and had to do. This little video, if you can see it moving, shared on social media, was simply walking in on one of our weekly maintenance and security visits to the house to make sure that the house was safe and cared for during lockdown. But it got a great reaction on social media. And it chimed with many of the things a lot of us have felt during this period of reconnecting with nature, with some of the simpler, slower things of life. We also took our exhibitions programme online through a joint initiative run by the City of London Corporation's cultural venues called Our City Together, a new sort of web portal and channel, pretty much put together overnight, but gave us for the first time somewhere where we could post our web content, articles and exhibitions directly. And a lot of work has gone on to convert our planned exhibitions and planned displays and research into that channel. We've also worked with our Keats House poets, an existing group, as you saw before, but they all started to switch themselves because they're all culturally active, but they also took part in our online events programme, reading and responding to the themes in Keats's poetry, working with specific groups, school groups, and so on, to engage them with Keats's work. And we carried on our live interpretation, albeit filmed and uploaded online, this being the departure of Keats from Wentworth Place and his passing from Fanny Brawne, filmed on the 200th anniversary of that event. So even when Keats sailed away from Wentworth Place and England and left our shores completely, and we were able to reopen, albeit briefly, and albeit in a very limited way, but we were proud to reopen, proud to get audiences back in, proud to get our volunteers working again in the house and garden to support our programmes, and preparing now again, of course, to reopen the house again and re-engage people directly with this very special place. Here you're seeing the installation one of the sort of high points of Elaine Dwiggenon, our artist in residence, work at the house. And this installation is now installed. It's been widely shared online and is now ready to greet our visitors when they return as we reopen as soon as possible after the May deadline. Our Keats 200 Bicentenary exhibition is online, and there'll be a link in the chat already or to be shared on that. And that has allowed us to tell the story of Keats's life, and it will also tour London venues in autumn, and some of the programme itself will be moved to then. But we have, to some extent, reached the end of the programme, but we hope not the end of a lot of the things we've learned, because for me, the importance of literary houses, cultural venues, are that they act as this focal point. For me, there's some amazing places that stick in my mind where you really experience firsthand the weight or the pull or the experience of history. For me personally, some of those have been visits to the First World War trenches, or even Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and standing there feeling those momentous world events focused in a place. I'll also be looking forward, actually, when the galleries reopen, to going to the National Gallery and looking at one single painting which will transport me, even though I can't go to the streets of Paris 100 years ago, and I will look forward to re-engaging with that city, albeit vicariously. And so really the purpose of the house is to act as that focal point for all our activity. The activity of the charity is to preserve and maintain Keats House and Garden as a live memorial to John Keats. And it's literally a literary meeting place and centre. That's the objective of our charity. That's the work we hope we have continued, strengthened, and will continue to do beyond the end of the Keats 200 Bicentenary. And we hope to share that with our partners and more as we go beyond 2021 and into the next phase of probably actually working towards telling the stories of the other people that live there. Fanny Keats, we're publishing the letters that she now writes to Keats's, sorry, I said Fanny Keats, Fanny Braun, the letters she writes to Keats's sister, Fanny Keats. A very moving collection in itself, and one that tells the story of two women in Regency, 19th century England, who actually had a longer history at the house than John Keats himself, and the 100th anniversary of the charity and the house opening to the public in 2025. So hopefully we've got lots of things to keep us going. Hopefully you'll join us on that journey as we carry on our work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rob. Round of applause for a really fascinating talk, and so many partnerships that you have been developing. It's just really inspiring. And I really like what you said about the way that people come to the house to contemplate what Keats thought and what Keats saw and how that inspires them. Someone posted in the chat about that Keats letter where he talks about imagining what position Shakespeare would have, the other Shakespeare would have been in when he began to be or not to be. Yeah, I think obviously I adore Keats House, and I think that connection that can be brought out by the place was really evident in your presentation. Thank you. Next, we'll turn to Nicola Watson. So Nikki, if you're there, I will ask you to unmute in just a second. Nicola Watson holds a chair in English literature at the Open University. She is a specialist in the cultural history of Romanticism with interests in travel writing and literary tourism, the Writers' House Museum, and more generally in the material culture of European Romanticism. Her publications include The Author's Effects on the Writers' House Museum, and she is the Association Coordinator for European Romanticisms in Association and the Principal Investigator of Dreaming Romantic Europe. Nicola was also bar's president from 2011 to 2015. So welcome, Nicola. We're looking forward to your talk today.
Good evening, everybody. Can you see me? I'm sort of can't see myself. Is it the first thing? Let me see if I can find my pictures.
Yes, we can see and hear you. Sounds good.
Can you hear me? And can you see the picture?
We haven't seen you. We can't see your shared screen yet. No.
That is a pity. Hang on a second. Let's see whether I can do something about that. It would be so nice not to have another disaster, wouldn't it, really? Hang on, let's see this.
Don't worry, don't worry.
Can you see that?
Yes, we can. Can you put it in presentation mode?
Yes, there we go. All right.
Perfect, thanks.
Perfect. Okay, fantastic. Well, first of all, I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me. I was just looking, you know, at the Keats House and sort of feeling both nostalgic, but also the joy of the fact that I'm going to be talking at an online event on Saturday, which is associated with the bicentenary of Keats' death, but organised in conjunction with the Keats House the Keats Shelley House in Rome. So there we are. You know, we hop around the world in all sorts of fascinating ways these days. There's going to be a short quiz in the chat box on where these various houses are. There are no prizes except for status. What I'm going to be doing, though, now is to talk very briefly about why and indeed how literary house museums have mattered in the past, with the idea of exploring what lessons the past may hold for the future of literary house museums going on from 2021. So this, in 1821, is the Burns Monument in Alaway, and labourers were still working on it that year. This has strong claims to being the first purpose-built literary museum. In 1814, a committee had formed under the chairmanship of Sir Alexander Boswell, who was the son of James, to establish a monument. The competition to design it had been won by Sir Thomas Hamilton with this 70-foot high temple in a Grecian style. It would look out from the four corners of the compass over Scotland and feature a roof supported by 9 pillars representing the 9 muses. Within the monument, a circular room housed Burns' memorabilia, so that's just sort of below those pillars, and then a walkway around the top provided views of the Brigadoon and the cottage in which Burns was born. And importantly, entrance was formally ticketed. So what I'm going to do is try to take apart the question by keyword here. So I want to start with mattering, really. How and why has the materiality of authorial object and place mattered? I suppose the idea that authorial object and place were important really gained traction in Britain well before 1821, around the 1780s. It manifested in increased interest in collecting authorial relics, in literary tourism to places associated with writers and their works, and a desire on the part of some authors to express their aesthetic in their houses, Strawberry Hill, Fonthill Abbey, and eventually, of course, Abbotsford. It's associated with new forms of celebrity authorship and with new forms of writing, the autobiographical, literary biography, and fiction ranging from the Gothic to the historical. And it draws on the anxieties around mass print culture that were being experienced at the time by writers and readers. Authorial place and object have always worked to create a figuration of authorship to govern an otherwise disparate body of writings. The Burns Monument, for example, was designed to allow simultaneous viewing of the place that gave birth to the poet and the setting for Tam O'Shanter. Access to authorial objects and place validated the experience of reading as a private transaction between writer and reader. And in fact, some of the speakers this evening have already, as it were, described that experience for themselves. Less obviously, the immersive 3D experience of place and object undid the original organization of any original individual literary text, reorganizing it as the reader's personal experience. And I wonder myself whether this effect may explain why academics of otherwise different theoretical persuasions are so often united in dislike of Writers' House museums. It's not just that they are radically suspicious of literary biography as a reading strategy, or that they disapprove of investing in the love of literature as a mystification of nationalism or capitalism and all their ills. But I suspect it's because this is such a very undisciplined variant of what Roland Barthes once called the readerly text. Well before literary houses became formalized as museums, there's some evidence that they were being used to amplify individual reading experiences with a sense of what it might be to live a fully achieved life. To reconstruct a house as a museum, of course, is to revive a now obsolete sense of museum as at once the home of the muses and as a building or apartment dedicated to the pursuit of learning or the arts, a place of study and sociability within a private home like the one we saw in Keswick. But it is also to simulate and reanimate those private spaces of home, and with them the privacies of both writing and reading, for the benefit of a paying public. Housing this ambiguous mix of writing and reading experience in a museum at once locates it and naturalizes it. However, making a local habitation for airy nothing, to paraphrase A Midsummer Night's Dream, has also very often ended up making a local habitation for the national. And this is because such houses were also being used from very early on to convene communities of readers. To take one example only, admirers were already gathering in Burns's honour in his birthplace, at this time very conveniently a pub, well before 1800. From the mutually visible literary club to Benedict Anderson's imagined national community of readers is a shortish step. This national community of readers is not just geographical, but historical. Community is always continuity of readership, both securing and secured by national sentiment. The literary museum works to create a vernacular literary canon to replace the classics. And this is at bottom why Burns's Scots verse is commemorated in neoclassical style. But this is also, of course, why, as this evening's conversation has already suggested, people are rendered anxious about the necessity of producing more diversity of audience. Well, if you'd asked me this question up on the slide in January 2020, when I was busy launching my book on Writers' House museums in the Keats House, called The Author's Effects, available from all good bookshops near you once they finally open, and meanwhile online, I would have said that there was a boom in literary house museum making and remaking right across the world. Many were driven by an interest in nation making, some by a desire to diversify the literary foundations of the nation. A few were making a bid to go transnational or even global. Simultaneously, they were evolving to present themselves as creatively generative. So an entertainment devised for the 2016 redevelopment of the empty site of Shakespeare's house at New Place in Stratford-upon-Avon, and this is a photograph of that, at once expressed and parodied this. Visitors were invited to become a muse catcher with the United Nations Board of Significant Inspiration. The idea was that Shakespeare's house was located on a geological fissure emanating literary inspiration known as MUSE, an acronym for micromolecular unseen sensory emanations. Shakespeare was thus constructed as merely a secondary effect of the place itself. By visiting it, we could all become equally, democratically Shakespearean. So I wanted to think over the last year or so about the virtual Literary House Museum, or rather actually what I think of now as the possibility of a hybrid virtual material museum. One of the effects of this last remarkable year has been a longing for materiality and sociability. But another has been to restructure this longing for materiality and sociability through the virtual, as we are doing at the moment. Museums, including Literary House museums, understandably invested in auratic objects and spaces, have been forced to go online in various ways and to varying degrees. And the result has not, I think, been quite what we expected. It turns out that those accustomed to going places via the virtual flying carpets of books are delighted to go via the virtual flying carpet of the internet to places associated with those books, and are, moreover, increasingly prepared to pay for the privilege. You will say that it's not the same experience as really setting foot there, and that is inarguable. But it is not necessarily an inferior experience. And we should note what a lot of advantages accrue to house museums from virtual tourism. Virtual tourist feet don't scuff the skirting board. Virtual bottoms don't need chairs, no loos, no cups of coffee, no parking. Collections stuck in storage can be displayed. The fine detail of manuscripts can be pored over. Objects held elsewhere can come home. Different types of visitors can readily be offered different types of experiences. And these experiences can be offered as tasters or in depth and at any time of the day or night. An unprecedented opportunity for diversifying audience opens up. Literary pilgrims from right around the globe can be welcomed over the threshold, an easier sell after all than the casual tourist trying to escape the rain, but so too can we welcome those who for other reasons, many reasons, poverty and disability, are unable to travel. The possibility of creating networked museums opens up. How about being able to gift a year-long subscription to a virtual museum visit once a week? Opportunities offer for creating new online communities of readers and new literary sociability, which connects all sorts of readerly homes with the literary house. More dispiritingly, although books have served to beguile the ills of lockdown, the arts are even lower on the list of the Treasurer's preoccupations as we exit the pandemic. So I want to suggest that academics and museums should be working together to argue and evidence the power of literary heritage to convene and sustain the communities locally, nationally, and transnationally. We should be devising ways to sustain cultural connection and feed cultural creativity by making literary houses places of sociable imaginative expansion, not just on site, but online. Key to this is liveness, not materiality as such. And much of this can be monetized so as to keep the physical house financially viable. So how about combining ideas like fixed webcams pointed at sites of inspiration day and night? I'd like to see what Grasmere looks like at dawn, for example, with ticketed online readings, global book clubs, monthly special tours of the collections, flash lectures on a 3D photographed exhibit of the month, creative performances by candlelight, souvenirs that can be 3D printed on demand, study days for schools and universities. Or, come to think of it, how about a virtual exhibition housing a whole collection of romantic houses, such as the one we're currently working on for RARE, Romantic Europe, the virtual exhibition. Then we could even include all those bothersomely missing literary house museums, perhaps those devoted to Robert Southey, or Felicia Hemans, or Mary Shelley, just for a start. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicola, for such a wonderful talk. I hope everyone enjoyed guessing where those beautiful places were. God, it makes me want to go and visit them again. I really think there's such a collection of exciting ideas that you shared there, and all the potential that comes with this online space that museums are starting to inhabit. And yes, highly recommend that if you haven't sought out Nicola's book, The Author's Effects on Writers' House Museums, then do. There's a lot more in there, of course, about the live list of the museums, and I really love how Nicola talks about that personal encounter between the reader and the writer that the reader and the writer that happens when we go into these places. So thank you. Next is Amy Wilcockson, and Amy is a PhD researcher at the University of Nottingham. She is editing the letters of the Scottish Romantic poet Thomas Campbell, and Amy enjoys spending a lot of her time lurking in the archive, which I'm sure she will tell you in a moment. She has completed placements and volunteered at the Boots Archives and Records Centre, at Chatsworth House, at Nottingham City Museums and Galleries, and the D.H. Lawrence Birthplace Museum. She's also a big Byron fan, and she is beginning a research placement. Oh, has already begun the research placement at Newstead Abbey this year. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure how I can follow all of these wonderful presentations. Can everybody see this on the screen now?
Yes, we can. Can you just put it up into presentation? Yeah, now we can see.
Yeah, is that better? Yeah, awesome. Right, I shall begin. So yeah, thank you very much to, thank you. Thank you very much to Anna and the BARS Digital Events team for inviting me to speak today alongside the other amazingly knowledgeable members of this panel. It's a real honour. So yeah, thank you very much. I'm here tonight to discuss Newstead Abbey, the ancestral home of the 6th Lord Byron, who, as we all know, is one of the most famous and well-recognised names in Romantic poetry. So this panel's aim is to discuss literary house museums and their relevance in 2021. But my argument is that Newstead Abbey is multifaceted and does not solely define itself as just a literary house museum. So I thought we'd begin by entering Lord Byron's dining chamber. So dimly lit and cosy, the fire roars in the hearth, whilst on the table the candles flicker and waver in the simple silver chandelier. A newspaper lies open alongside the bottle and 2 glasses of half-drunk wine. A crumpled napkin and barely touched meal are also on the table, and the chair is pushed back, as though the diner has been interrupted mid-meal and will be returning shortly. Not captured in this photograph is the half-open door in the far left corner. Trapped behind the visitor's rope on this side of the room, we wonder where it leads and where the mysterious diner has gone. So this room, labelled as Byron's dining room, means that we can kind of almost feel his presence in the room. And the interpretation on this side of the house is completely focused on the poet. The 6th Lord's bedroom is directly above this spot with its authentically Byronic bed. And the corridor outside this room leads to the library, which features many of Byron's belongings, both his personal and his literary. So this includes his dog Bosun's large metal collar, his books, and his famous Greek helmet. Amelia Curran's portrait of Claire Claremont hangs in prominent position on the wall, opposite portraits of Lord Byron's mother, Catherine Gordon, and his Byron ancestors. And incidentally, I'm not too sure how Byron would feel about that. I think he'd probably have something to say about it. And as I've said, there is an obvious focus on the poet in this area of the house. But as Simon Brown, Newstead Abbey's curator, told me, the way the staff view Newstead is this. So if we think of a stone being thrown in a pond, and then that causes many ripples kind of coming out from that, Byron is the stone, and the house's other inhabitants and stories ripple out from him. So Byron was influenced by all that came before him at Newstead, and obviously he influenced everything that came afterwards. So this is emphasised as visitors explore the Abbey further. So moving through the rooms, each tells a different story. So the room we can see here is the wicked 5th Lord and Byron's predecessor's bedchamber, and his lady's is next door. So in the Lord's bedchamber, we have his clothes, lying strewn across the chair and the bed. There's bottles of alcohol and food on the small table, and the bed covers are thrown back. Again, the room's inhabitant has just stepped out for a while, leaving the visitor alone with the paraphernalia of his daily life. The first room the visitors see is not really anything to do with Byron either, to be honest. It's linked to the Webb family, as the Great Hall has been reinterpreted there to replicate an 1890s photograph. Further work's also being done at the moment on the stories that have traditionally been underrepresented at Newstead. And one aspect of this is more research that's being done on the servants and staff who manned this huge house. And in this respect, Newstead is not just a literary museum telling the story of one man, but serves as a basis to tell a variety of other wider ranging stories. Speaking to Simon, I was speaking to him on Monday about this, and we kept coming back to this constant tension between the Byronic, as in relating to the poet, and the non-Byronic, for want of a better word, and how best to kind of balance this, how the staff do this. It's also key to remember that Byron himself only lived at Newstead full-time for probably, I think it's under a year, before moving on to London, to Europe, and then to Greece. So although he inherited the house at the age of 10 in 1798, the estate was leased for many years, and when in Nottinghamshire, Byron generally lived with his mother in Southall, which is around 15 miles away. Similarly, the Newstead that we see today would have been fundamentally unrecognisable to Byron. The majority of the house as we know it today is kind of as it was when later owners, such as Thomas Wildman and the Webbs, had made their mark. When Byron lived in the Abbey, it was a virtual ruin with only a few rooms furnished and habitable. Therefore, it makes complete sense that we have to tell these other stories alongside Byron's in order to explain the history of this house. And this is where another facet of Newstead kind of comes in. Of course, it's not just a literary house, but it's also an ancestral country estate as well. So speaking to Simon, he said that a large majority of visitors believe that it's actually a National Trust property, but this is incorrect. Newstead Abbey is actually owned by Nottingham City Council, and they've owned it since 1931. As such, and I'm sure Keats House probably has to do this too, Newstead has an obligation to reflect local audiences and behave commercially. And the Abbey is run on a break-even basis. So as you can imagine, the current pandemic has had quite an effect on this, particularly in the loss of wedding parties, which are one of Newstead's largest sources of income. And when thinking about local visitors who make up probably the largest share of Newstead visitors, to be honest, the thing that they're most interested in is the Abbey's parklands and garden, and these cover over 300 acres. So these vast spaces are particularly valuable and frequently used, especially at the moment, and will become more useful, I think, over the next few months as we can hopefully spend more time outside and get back to our museums and literary houses. In normal times, the gardens and the house play host to a really diverse range of events. So there are outdoor theatre performances, there are adventure trails, classic car shows, and apparently at Halloween, very exciting ghost tours that end with the ghost of Byron climbing into a coffin and shutting the lid on himself. So I'm sure we can all, go to one of those when the world's back to normal. And for locals, obviously, whilst they may not know who Byron is or much about the history of the house, in their eyes, Newstead Abbey is a really great day out. And these visitors are really important for the long-term survival of the site. In conclusion then, although Newstead can be considered for all intents and purposes a literary house museum, as it provides information about, it contains objects relating to, and it raises awareness of a certain person and their literary works, it's also a lot more than this. So it's a council-funded country house, it's a large family-friendly tourist attraction, it's a parkland that holds events, and it's also a first-class wedding venue. So as I said at the start of this short talk, there is a constant and ongoing tension between these differing facets of Newstead. But I think the staff have done a really great job of balancing all these things and demonstrating that Newstead is for everyone, particularly in 2021. when we're increasingly taking comfort from the little things like a walk outside or the beautiful architecture. From pilgrims from Greece who will be able to return to Newstead Abbey in the next few years, and apparently it's a really common thing that they're frequently brought to tears at the sight of it. To the young boys who last Saturday when I visited Newstead and took these pictures you can see now, they were two small boys kicking a football around the gardens, and then I saw them later on and they were eating ice cream, it was quite sunny, with their feet in the River Leen. Newstead holds a really unique position in all of these different people's hearts, and also in the study of museums and literary house museums in particular. And I think it's this uniqueness that makes Newstead special, and also creates the wonderful place that we all kind of know and love. So yeah, thank you everybody very much for listening, and I will finish there.
Thank you so much, Amy. I really like the idea of Newstead is for everyone, because it encapsulated how much they do with the amount of space that they have there, with regards to there being, you know, just that we've talked a bit about the outside spaces that come with these buildings too, and I think that was really well captured in your little image of the kids playing in Newstead.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm not quite sure I like the Ghost of Byron as much. That's
we'll see. I'll have to check it out.
Sounds like that bar they have in Edinburgh where Frankenstein's monster comes and puts himself in a coffin. So I didn't know, that sounds quite similar. Anyway, yeah, and I love the reference to the Claire Claremont portrait. I love that Claire's portrait is up in Byron's old house. I think
it gets me every time I go. It really makes me laugh.
Thank you. Thanks, Amy. Now we're going to come to Jeff now, who is, we think we have fixed our technical issues. So Jeff, do you want to just share your screen? Thank you everyone for your patience. We're going to add a little bit of time onto the end today with the questions, so we have time to ask some questions. Of course, if we know people have other commitments, if you need to leave, this is recorded so you can come back and catch the questions another time. So just to let you know, we'll go past past today. Jeff, is your screen share working? Here we go. This is looking good.
Let's put the sound on.
Oh, it's gone again.
There we go.
It's gone again now, Jeff.
How about, are we there?
Yeah, and I think if you start the slide show. Wonderful. Thank you. Take it away.
Thank you, everybody. And I do apologize again. And I'm sorry for the part I played in keeping it running late. I'll just really quickly skim through the first couple. So just to show you the house. There's the people, of course, William and Dorothy, living in Dove Cottage for those 8 years from 1799 to 1808. That there is the essence of what we really believed Wordsworth 250 was about. And the crucial thing just from this slide really is to remember that it's about making the words live and do good. And that's come through everything that we've heard so far. It's about the poets, the writers' lives and their words coming to the fore and living today. I was talking about the three things I was going to talk about quickly: the daily visit, the networks of knowledge and shared experience, and then to end with a case study. The visitor experience, Dove Cottage, redeveloped, reinterpreted this year, and hopefully opening on the 17th of May, we hope. I talked about children's experience, but also about the importance for older people and how it's been very moving recently to see someone living with dementia coming to Dove Cottage, remembering poet lines from the Daffodils poem, and for a moment they were themselves again. And so that's the power of words. So I was kind of coming around to saying that it's the words that set us apart. The words came from the place, they were created in the place, and we have this opportunity to return them to the place. And through these words, we give people the opportunity to pause. Here, and you'll recognize a bit of words coming in here, offering people the opportunity to get away from a world that is too much with us, to recognize that in this moment, there's life and food for future years, reminded that we have all of us one human heart. And so words are re-inhabiting the site at Townend, the cottage, the house, the museum. But the words, of course, also allow for people to be absorbed and transformed. And one of the ways, of course, is manuscripts. They take us to specific moments in space and time. With a manuscript, as you can see on the table there, with a manuscript, we can look over the shoulder of a writer or a reader. And in the writing, we can feel the texture of thought behind the formation of letters with the quill and ink. State of mind or state of mood, a hurried moment or an anxious one. And William's draft prelude lines, which you can see in that little notebook on the left there, on the table where in early 1804, William, Dorothy and Mary created a book of all Wordsworth poems as a gift of love for Coleridge, who was, of course, so seriously ill and about to go to the Mediterranean for health reasons. So manuscripts, the place, the words can absorb us and take us to specific moments in time. Literary museums offer great takeaways. You can buy the book, you can buy the poem in a book, and you take away the exhibit. You can take away the real thing in a way that a poster of a painting never will be. We offer the authentic takeaway. So that again is putting words at the heart of what we do and at the heart of everything, really. We can relive these moments. So that's the first essence, if you like, the essence of the day visit. What we call the day visit, sometimes disparagingly, I think, paying customer, the day visitor. They're every bit as much a learner as the school child on a special outing. So that's one thing I was going to talk about. The second thing I want to talk about is that museums or rather literary houses as centres for creation and the sharing of knowledge and understandings. And here we traditionally think about academic scholarship. So our designated collection here holding significant pictures, books, manuscripts, explored in the very place of their creation. A Wordsworth letter studied in Texas or studied in Grasmere, does it make a difference? A virtual international conference around a literary house, the Romantic Europe Virtual Exhibition gathering last June. And more than one knowledge. And in 2021, we shall explore Dorothy Wordsworth's writing and life through collaborative project groups involving curators, academics, community groups, and creative practitioners. So, for example, one artist, himself with dyslexia, will be working with members of Borough and District Society for the Blind and our outreach officer to explore perceptions of landscape in Dorothy's account of her 1803 Scottish tour. And an American student who studied Dorothy Wordsworth and asexuality there's going to be 8 of these altogether, 8 of these collaborative projects. 8 of these together will form part of the exhibition online as well. And such researches and interpretation make the Wordsworth more real and more relatable and more relevant, and therefore the real impact. Real impact with a small I and a capital I. Our next exhibition brings together an academic on Wordsworth's 1820 before he even read the poems. Elsewhere, a school class in El Paso writes letters with a quill, folding them Regency style and posting them to England. And one day I got a box with 53 Regency style letters written by children with quill and pen in the Texas desert. A group of young refugees now living in West Yorkshire explored the Lake District through Dove Cottage's words and connections. And the Wordsworths themselves, of course, had a great interest in homemaking. And it seemed they just, well, you can see, they so much enjoyed being in the place and being with the collections. So poetry, through its representative museum, if you like, can be seen to be living and do good. So 200 years ago, our literary house was an amazing place for reading, conversation, imagination, creativity. And we wish that to be the same today. We have poets in residence, as Rob was saying, at Keats House. And we're further developing the talent of young people through writing groups. So here's Hannah, part of the Dove Cottage Young Poets. So we have 2 young people's writing groups. We also have adult groups for discovering poetry and for people writing their own. So again, Literary Museum, keeping literature alive. And so to end, what follows captures the very essence of our Literary House Museum. In the north part of Cumbria, the less economically well-off area, is a group of people, the Park Hill Poets. These are people with disabilities who meet fortnightly to discuss and to write poetry. And over 15 years, the time we've known them, they've visited the house, they've taken tea in the house, they've advised us on improving our accessibility, helped our training. And they've also created their own poems inspired by our poetry, people and place. And recently they explored the poem Simon Lee, the Old Huntsman, which, as you probably may know, features an old, infirm man who, of course, was not always so. And we're told that when Simon was younger, he all the country could outrun. And now, as the poem tells us, he struggles even to cut a piece of wood. The poem features in one of a dozen similar audiovisual pieces in the new museum. And as context, Fiona Stafford of Oxford University introduces visitors to the characters of the lyrical ballads, their needs and their dignity, and how the poems encourage an empathy much needed today. Fiona reminds us, don't assume Simon Lee has always been an old man. And she concludes with an example from her own life, making the point perfectly. Don't assume anything about any of us just by our appearances, which is the essence of the poem. I shall leave the last words to Fiona and the Park Hill Poets, the final section of their museum film, a collaboration of literary house, academic and community group, interpreting a poem from the past for the present and making both of them live and do good.
My mother, who recently turned 90, sometimes says that now, if she meets someone for the first time, she feels like telling them she hasn't always been an old woman.
Assumption, January the 8th, 2020. Assumption, young and full of life, red as a ripe cherry. That was us then and now. The changes between then I had, than I could, than I did. Remember, there is a time in me. 2 sides to every story, or even 4, 5 or 6. My story doesn't stop there. New frontiers await me if people see me differently. Don't assume, give me the tools, I can still make a Victoria sponge or a jam or a porridge. Now I wait, now I can, now I do, try and stop me.
Thank you, Jeff, for such a beautiful and inspiring talk to close our selection of speakers this evening. I'm going to invite the panel to all come back with their cameras on and join us. And yeah, I just thought it was, as people said in the chat, worth the wait to have those amazing images and the video from Jeff there. And I think that phrase "live and do good" used at the beginning was incredibly powerful, as we saw all the amazing work that Wordsworth Grasmere is doing with local communities. I went to my first Romanticism conference at Dove Cottage, and I think, yeah, that's never going to be able to beat that, is it? You know, it's such an important place. So yes, I would like to open the discussion to questions now. So if you have any questions, do put them in the chat. We're going to talk for about 15 minutes in terms of responding to the questions. One of the questions that came up earlier on, and I think this just speaks to what all the panelists have been saying today, is thinking about what museums can do to engage people from diverse communities. Now, I know the talks have touched on that in various ways, but I wondered if anyone on the panel wanted to add anything to that with regards to what can be done to reach communities that wouldn't necessarily automatically engage with a place like Dove Cottage or Keats House or Newstead Abbey, for example, or Keswick Museum.
I wonder if I could offer a point. So one of the things that we've looked at Keswick Museum, and one of the results of the Robert Southey's Keswick project last year was designing a Robert Southey loan box. So it's the idea that actually there can be an educational box taken into schools. Now, this is really important in particularly the north areas of the Lake District, which are actually more economically deprived. So it may be the case that schools cannot afford to bring their students to us as a museum and to explore the literary collection in and of itself and to see Greta Hall. So that's kind of one of the ways that we've been trying to ensure that the material we produce is accessible and can really get different ensure that people have a fair opportunity to see the collections whilst they're students.
Anna, I don't know if you want me to come in briefly, but like Jeff in particular there, but also others on the panel, I think it's really crucial that we do reach out to audiences, perhaps particularly in the aftermath of the pandemic, although that wasn't in my mind when I set out on Keats 200. It certainly is now, because I think we all know how time consuming and resource consuming working with groups can be. Any external group. It sort of demands a lot of commitment, time, resource and energy just to kind of get that started and keep the momentum going. And I really fear that with some of the sort of dire economic focus we're going to have to place on just sort of staying alive as institutions, that's often the first stuff to get cut, but it's the stuff that is most needed, particularly at this time. I think that we re-engage people and we add value back into the curriculum. You can imagine that schools will just be on narrow focus potentially, and understandably, about, okay, we've got to get them ready for this exam and they're all now a year behind. And it's the added value cultural aspects of their education that often get cut first, and that would be a real regret, and something I, and I'm sure others, will be campaigning hard for the role of museums to carry on.
Yeah, because I feel like, especially thinking about education, museums are something that spark a conversation. And if, as you say, Robert, the focus becomes very much on passing exams, for example, then you lose that kind of peer interaction, which is something I've seen happen at Keats House, for example, which is wonderful for children. Jeff, your internet dropped out for a minute there. So we're just talking about how to diversify audiences, how we can engage people from diverse communities with our museums. So just to fill you in on what the question was, but we did hear the end of your wonderful video. That all worked perfectly. And Nicola, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I think, well, I mean, as you heard, I think that the online environment has virtues here, potentially, because it's so cheap. To reach out to schools and such like, and because it's possible, you know, I absolutely take Rob's point about what hard work it is to work with groups, but of course increasingly in the universities what we're doing is rather like on the radio. We work with small live groups, but we stream it to very much larger groups. So I mean, that's my sort of first thought. My second thought is in an odd sort of way against that, or supplementary to it, which is that my experience working with the Museo Byron and the local schools there in Ravenna was that locality was a great puller in of students because of really what amounts to citizenship. So you can always start from a locality, which is an entirely different idea to this idea of sort of global online access. So that I think, and one of the odd initiatives that has happened over perhaps the last 7 years, I don't know whether anybody remembers the moment that Dylan Thomas's writing hut was created in replica, put on some wheels and towed around Wales in order to act as a creative space in all sorts of situations where people would be encouraged to come into the shed and write themselves, and therefore literally, as you might say, write themselves into a national sort of canon. So that business of taking things to people and bringing things and bringing people to the place, I think has almost certainly changed forever this year, I have to say. And I think that's not all bad. I do, of course, at the Open University, we do an enormous amount of work trying to reach unusual audiences, as you might say. So we do a lot of work with students in secure environments, that sort of thing. I could imagine taking some of Wordsworth's poetry into prisons in that way as well. So, I mean, I suppose what this really amounts to is you can try a lot of different things. And it's just really a question of calculating how expensive it is in time and labour. But it's nearly always more expensive to reach what are called, to reach less traditional sorts of audiences, inevitably, I think.
Yes, Jeff.
I could. I mean, I suppose I don't have an answer for Jill's question in particular, but I was thinking about our most recent moment where we just did this event with the Society of the Blind for the Blind in Barrow in Furness, and it was just a talk about collections, talk about the poems, and it emerged that they had a real interest in Dorothy. And I suppose what we have to, well, I don't know, I'm speaking to 130 people, so I do have to be careful what I say. But the thing I suppose I would think is that within a group of people who have visual impairment, there will be people across the demographic spectrum. And so that is a kind of way of broadening audiences without thinking, yes, I need to go to that particular economic background or that particular so-and-so background. So groups that have that common theme, as it were, do help us broaden our outreach, as it were.
Thanks, Jeff. I don't know if Amy, you have anything to add, because I know you've been doing lots of online stuff as well, trying to get to wider audiences. I don't know if that's what you were going to talk about, but
yeah, I was just gonna pop in and say, so at Newstead, obviously I don't work at Newstead. I'm only on a research placement there, so I'm not privy to all of the discussions that are going on in the background. But I know that they've got for school groups and education and stuff like that, they've got a very creepy Victorian schoolroom upstairs in Newstead that I've had the misfortune to visit once, and it's very creepy, but they take school classes up there as well. And I think if you're at the Bars conference, I think on the trip you got treated to the Victorian kitchen at Newstead as well, and I know that they take school groups and stuff in there. There's also a lot of work happening at Newstead at the moment. I mentioned earlier about traditionally underrepresented demographics, so that's servants. There's also some exhibitions and things in the pipeline, but I don't think I'm allowed to talk about them, so I won't. For Jill's question, I didn't know, I was going to pass over to Rob, because I know that he's been doing some really cool stuff with poetry versus colonialism. So I didn't know, Rob, can you talk about that? Because I was talking to you about this, and it's all really interesting. So.
Yeah, thanks. I should have mentioned that in my presentation, but one of the Keats House poets. They came to me with a proposal for their residency, and it was poetry versus colonialism. It chimed with us for all sorts of reasons with Keats 200, but particularly with Black Lives Matter and the focus on reinterpreting our collections. That came to good timing for us. And so Lila Thompson is involved in an Arts Council England funded project now. We gave her some initial funding through Keats House, and that's now gained Arts Council funding as well. A wider project that is looking at various cultural collections, including the collections of Keats House, and reinterpreting them through the sort of lens of the colonial experience, and that's incredibly interesting and creative workshop. I don't know, one of the difficulties we have at the moment is actually seeing who is in our online audiences and finding out a bit more about them. So doubtless we'll all get more skillful about that, and I look forward to sharing the experience of my colleagues as we go through that together. But yeah, that is doubtless a really interesting prospect for us. And we've also got a relationship with Roehampton University now with a Techne funded research student placement. Phoebe Lambden will be looking at our collections and researching those, hopefully with a focus particularly on the Fanny Braun and Fanny Keats correspondence, and bringing that to new audiences and looking at it in different ways with different voices.
Thank you.
Can I just chip in? Sorry, I was just gonna, what I forgot to say earlier. I was going to talk about my placement and then I didn't. So my placement is looking at initially at the Byron family letters. So not just Lord Byron, but all the kind of other probably traditionally more underrepresented Byrons as well. And I'm transcribing them, cataloguing them, and then we're hoping to orally record them as well. So as you're walking around, you can hear them, or we can put them online, things like that. And then that's obviously, once we've got accurate transcriptions of them, then we can look into turning them into things like Braille, other ways of encountering these kind of letters. So I'll finish there, but sorry, I just wanted to drop that in.
That's great. So we haven't got too long left, so I'm just going to put another question to the panel. I mean, this was a question posed by a question about using kind of digital and virtual reality immersive experiences, and also so Anthony Mandel asked about that, and also Dan Cook asked about how the recent trend for those moving portraits, I don't know if you saw them on Twitter when all the people from the past came alive. I don't know if Anthony or Dan wants to speak. I mean, if they are there and they want to ask their question, they can, but I suppose the general question is yeah, how do you see these kind of immersive experiences using even more advanced digital projections existing in the future of museums? Can you see a virtual Keats around the house? I don't know. Yeah, Nicola, go on.
Yeah. So what I mean, I assume the things that Dan are mentioning are such like the recent installation in Brussels Airport, I think, for Valentine's Day, where they had an old master hanging up, and they made one of the Cupids come alive and through a sort of micro video, and it flew around. And it was all extremely charming, and was designed immediately for the people sitting in the airport. But the thing is that it then went viral, which is how it got to me, because I wasn't sitting in the airport. So I think that we need to understand a sort of continuum between the actual physical space and the things that are going on online in ways that I don't think, I think we're accustomed not to think of it as a continuum. So that it is not really, I suspect, it's not really necessary to think about the immersive experience that actually happens in the Writers' House Museum as entirely separate to the immersive experience that you can have online. What I think really distinguishes or is the sticking point is the equipment and technical hitches that you get when you're trying, for example, to use your phone to see the ghost of Byron, say, at Newstead Abbey, and somehow the techniques get in the way. And I've been, very interested in what of those initiatives work and what don't. One that was successful was the Talking Statues initiative. I don't know whether anybody remembered it. It was copied out of, it happened around London, but it was copied out of New York to begin with. And that was immersive in a slightly different way. That's to say, it was enhanced reality. You were in the real place and then reality was enhanced. So what I think is that one should think of it generally in the spectrum, remembering that a literary house museum is anyway a sort of enhanced reality. So that, it's degrees as much as anything else. And indeed, whether you can afford it, I suppose.
That's what I was going to say. It's a question of the finances and things as well, isn't it? Because I know I was talking to Simon about this the other day, actually, because we were saying that it would be interesting to see the inside of Bosun's tomb, because apparently there's a full-on like crypt thing down there, and obviously it's not practical to have visitors traipsing down there, but I think people would be interested in seeing that. I mean, I would be, but obviously again it is the financial aspect of things. So perhaps that's where the future of funding bids is, I guess, in stuff like that.
I think there's a really interesting article that came out in Nature about unfolding letters. So the fact that you can digitally unfold letters, historic letters, and it was all over Twitter yesterday, and I was just watching the animation consistently. But that is decades in production, that project. So the idea of seeing what you cannot see, and it adds towards conservation and preservation. I would love to find out how much that cost, just in terms of the human time that is put into it. But it's an incredible project, but again, it is that underlying sustainability of funding. And I wonder if actually on that note, something that I noticed was at the beginning of the pandemic, so we're talking kind of March, April time, the Museums Association Journal released a blog on the popularity of online museum visits. So for example, walking around the Louvre, the British Museum Google Maps, it peaked immediately and then it went very, very quiet. So it's an interesting thing that we're talking about this, because actually what happened was that they were viewed as sort of one-off, wow, look what you can do. But actually it wasn't the right time perhaps, or perhaps people didn't, homeschooling had just kicked in. People were too panicked trying to figure out other ways to kind of normalize their lifestyles. But actually there was a dip in people using digital museums. So I don't know kind of how we work with that. I think now people have different expectations of museums now that it's been a year in this new reality. But actually it was proven to be something that might not be sustainable right at the very beginning of the pandemic.
Could I just very quickly comment on that? I think that's true, but you see, the thing about those virtual tours was that they were, I mean, especially of places like the Louvre, they were so directive, inevitably. Now, I mean, a literary house museum is a slightly different deal, because a house, in some respects, has different ways of, has conventional ways of moving through it. But I think the real problem with those virtual museum tours was that you couldn't wander at will. But there isn't really any reason why you can't design it to be so. Eventually. So, we'll have to see, won't we?
Just a very quick point. I can't quite remember your exact phrase. I responded to it in chat, but I think, Nicola, you said something like a longing for materiality. I wonder actually whether there'll be a bit of a pushback from digital experiences and virtual experiences as we reopen, because we have spent a lot of time staring at screens. And I think that point you made, Charlotte and Nicola, about the potential of the really high value projects that allow us to explore collections and houses and places in different ways, not necessarily financial value, but high cultural value, and creating that continuum is the way.
Jeff?
100%. I mean, we took a deliberate decision that certainly for the on-site interpretation, that our whole aim really was to slow people down. And you know, if we have a poet whose main line, if you like, is "Let nature be your teacher," we felt that we shouldn't be introducing technology between the visitor and that bit of nature, if you like. And we also felt too that we didn't want to be discriminatory in terms of the gadget you had to have. You know, we did have some QR codes in the garden. Well, does everybody really have the phone? I mean, probably, but you know, it seems unfair to rely on that. The other side to that is thinking about, well, how can technology, if you like, help us get closer to the real thing? And I just learned today we've been unsuccessful in a bid for a robot. And you may have seen these robots, and these robots you can have in your sitting room at Dove Cottage or your sitting room at home, and you can control them from your smartphone at home. And so, picking up Nicola's point about self-directed, you know, you could have that group wherever, for whatever reason, can't get to Grasmere, and they can control their robot, go around the room, look at things that they choose to look at, and then talk to you about them as you go. So that seems to me a tremendous use of technology, which brings you closer to the real thing.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you everyone for your interesting responses to that possibility. So I'm going to bring things to a close because we are running over now. We've had so many interesting questions in the chat, and we'll make sure those questions are saved and circulated to all our speakers this evening so they have read them. Maybe we need Romanticism in the Museum Part 2, I don't know. But thank you everyone for your attention tonight. One of the questions was about, will online events continue even once we go back to potentially doing things more normally again? And I think I can speak for everyone when I say I hope, we all hope that, you know, that we can continue to get the positives of these online events, even if things go back to how, or similar to how they once were. So I'd like to close by just saying thank you to all our excellent speakers. I think that phrase Jeff used in his talk, that words set us apart, was just really, really powerful. And I think that idea of how we thinking about spaces and objects, but how that actually engages us with the words in literary house museums, like the work that all of you do makes people want to go back to the literature and read. And that's just so powerful. That's just so important. Museums return people to the poetry and the novels and the words. That is it for this evening. Thank you to all our panelists. There is links in the chat to our next events. Thank you very much for joining us, and a virtual round of applause.
Thank you to Anna for chairing us as well.
Absolutely, Anna.
She's been an excellent chair.
Brilliant. Brilliantly done.
He's just woken up in time. Thank you everyone, that was really, really great. I know people may have to go, but we're just I'm still here for a little bit if we want to have a quick chat. But I just